The rottenness of the bank then became known, and a complete investigation into its management from 1830 to 1836, instituted by the stockholders, developed an astonishing degree of villainy, corruption, and rascality that was appalling, and the results of which more than sustained the charges brought against it by President Jackson and his supporters. It was discovered that hundreds of thousands of dollars were expended by President Biddle in influencing elections, subsidizing the press, and bribing members of Congress. The stockholders, on the completion of this investigation, instituted a suit against President Biddle in the United States Circuit Court at Philadelphia for the sum of $1,000 or $18,000 expended by him, for which no vouchers could be found. It was further demonstrated that from 1830 to 1836, during the struggle of the bank for a new lease of corporate life, loans aggregating more than $30,000 were made by its president to members of Congress, editors of newspapers, politicians of all grades, jobbers and brokers, mostly without security. Perhaps all the facts connected with its management were never made known on the ground of public policy, as the reputations of many eminent men, not excepting presidential candidates, would have been utterly ruined. In speaking of the contest between the bank and President Jackson Parton, the biographer says, "In these Jacksonian contests, therefore, we find nearly all the talent, nearly all the learning, nearly all the ancient wealth, nearly all the business activity, nearly all the book-nourished intelligence, nearly all the silver-forked civilization of the country, united in opposition to General Jackson, who represented the country's untutored instincts." Parton further says that Jackson was called a murderer, a traitor, an ignoramus, a fool, a crookback, a pretender, and various other vile names. Nicholas Biddle, who to a very large extent was responsible for the gigantic conspiracies, bank panic with their resultant ruin and misery, was driven in disgrace from his exalted position, and he died a shameful death almost unknown, unhonored, and unsung. The man before whom bowed in fawning adulation great and wise statesmen, merchant princes, editors of powerful journals, and leaders of public opinion, he who, in the magnitude of his financial plans and undertakings, rivaled the money kings of Europe, he who arrayed dollars against the immutable principles of justice and the rights of man, lived to see his name become a byword, a hissing, and a reproach. The career of the United States rank and its president is an awful monument of warning on the highway of time to come, an object lesson to that colossal greed of power, which, to tighten its grip upon the people, scatters distress and ruin in its train, and which, from its ramparts of ill-gotten wealth obtained by monopoly and special privileges, defies the laws of man and the laws of God. On the other hand, the fame of Jackson shines more and more with the lapse of time. Thomas Jefferson, the founder of American democracy and the friend of the human race, is honored as the great constructive statesman of America. Andrew Jackson is revered as that great leader who regenerated the politics of his country and rescued a people from financial slavery. During his administration, the public debt was wholly paid, a large surplus of public revenues accumulated to the credit of the United States. The money power was dethroned, the American nation was honored everywhere, and he retired from the presidency amid the plaudits of his countrymen. In his farewell address to the people, March 3, 1837, he solemnly warned them against the money power, that special privileges must not be granted to any class of citizens, and that justice must be the basis of public and private conduct. In this noble document, the president admonishes the people to be on their guard against the money power. He says, "But when the charter for the Bank of the United States was obtained from Congress, it perfected the paper system and gave to its advocates the position they have struggled to obtain from the commencement of the federal government down to the present hour. The immense capital and peculiar privileges bestowed upon it enabled it to exercise despotic sway over the other banks in every part of the country. From its superior strength, it could seriously injure, if not destroy, the business of any one of them that would incur its resentment, and it openly claimed for itself the power of regulating the currency throughout the United States. In other words, it asserted and undoubtedly possessed the power to make money plenty or scarce at its pleasure at any time and in any quarter of the Union by controlling the issues of other banks and in permitting an expansion or compelling a general contraction of the circulating medium according to its own will. The other banking institutions were sensible of its strength, and they soon became generally its obedient instruments, ready at all times to execute its mandates, and with the other banks necessarily went also that, numerous class of persons in our commercial cities who depend altogether on bank credits for their solvency and means of business, and who are therefore obliged for their safety to propitiate the favor of the money power by distinguished zeal and devotion in its service. The result of the ill-advised legislation which established this great monopoly was to concentrate the whole moneyed power of the Union, with its boundless means of corruption and its numerous dependents, under the direction and command of one acknowledged head, thus organizing this particular interest as one body and securing to it unity of action throughout the United States, and enabling it to bring forward upon any occasion its entire and undivided strength to support or defeat any measure of the government. In the hands of this formidable power, thus perfectly organized, was also placed unlimited dominion over the amount of circulating medium, giving it the power to regulate the value of property and the fruits of labor in every quarter of the Union, and to bestow prosperity or bring ruin upon any city or section of the country, as might best comport with its own interests or policy. We are not left to conjecture how the moneyed power, thus organized and with such a weapon in its hands, would be likely to use it. The distress and alarm which pervaded and agitated the whole country when the rank of the United States waged war upon the people in order to compel them to submit to their demands cannot yet be forgotten. The ruthless and unsparing temper with which whole cities and communities were oppressed, individuals impoverished and ruined, a scene of cheerful prosperity suddenly changed into one of gloom and despondency, ought to be indelibly impressed on the memory of the people of the United States. If such was its power in a time of peace, what would it not have been in a season of war with an enemy at your doors? No nation but the freemen of the United States could have come out victorious from such contest. Yet, if you had not conquered, the government would have passed from the hands of the many to the hands of the few, and this organized money power, from its secret conclave, would have dictated the choice of your highest officers, and compelled you to make peace or war as best suited their own wishes. The form of your government might for a time have remained, but its living spirit would have departed from it. The wise counsel coached in these golden words of President Jackson are now more applicable than when uttered by him. In the election of 1836, Martin Van Buren succeeded Jackson in the presidency. The panic engineered by the bank enveloped the people, and the whole system of credit built up by it fell with a crash. In fact, the bank had so shrewdly manipulated the volume of money and so absolute was its control over it, that society had resolved itself into two classes: a creditor class, small in numbers but powerful in influence; a debtor class, constituting a great majority of the people but helpless in the grasp of the creditor class. One was the master, the other the servant. During the administration of Van Buren, the independent Treasury bill became a law. Thus, the work begun by Jackson in crushing the bank was consummated by the separation of the public moneys from those of the banks, a most salutary reform.